Hello and welcome to the EU Perspectives podcast. I'm Jennifer Baker and today we are going to be diving into the subject of medicines, specifically the challenges facing the pharmaceutical industry at this time of geopolitical tension. We're going to look at the Critical Medicines Act, we'll talk a little bit about the pharma package and perhaps even the looking ahead at the MFF. Joining me to discuss that today, I'm very delighted to have with us Alessandra Moretti, who is an MEP from the S&D and a member of the Sant Committee on Public Health. We also have Ines Windisch, who is Head of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at the pharmaceutical company Zentiva. And last but by no means least, Andy Bounds, the Financial Times EU correspondent here in Brussels, to tell us all about what we can expect in the coming weeks and months when we look ahead at pharma. Alessandra, let me start with you. What currently do you see as the biggest challenges for the pharmaceutical sector here in Europe?
Thank you to invite me. The pharmaceutical sector, I think that is not different than any other industry sector in Europe. We pay the price of a non-sufficient integration, of course. We pay the price of being still far away from a federal union, of course. And in very challenging times where decision needs to be taken in a space of a day, we suffer from the lack of competencies at EU level to respond to global challenges. More specifically, for the pharma sector, I think that it's clear that we are facing challenges in terms of global competitiveness and investment gap with our competitors. It's clear that we suffer from a fragmentation of our internal markets. Having 27 systems, administrative burdens for approval of a new medicines, also price negotiations different for each member state complicates further situation. And so I believe that we have space for improvement, of course. We still need to see the effects of the new pharma package and Critical Medicine Act. However, I'm also convinced that we will find a solution not just through sectorial legislative interventions. Instead, we need to see at pharmaceutical sector as one component of an overall strategy to restore EU independence and sovereignty through a major shift in competencies at EU and federal level.
Well, thank you. Ines, let me turn to you and ask you more or less the same question, but from your perspective, what do you see the biggest challenges facing the sector and how do you represent the industry side?
So I think I can only echo what Alessandra said. So the competitiveness is one of the major topics we face. I think I'm working now 30 years in the pharma industry and I have seen a lot, but right now we see a lot of geopolitical tension that is disrupting supply chain. We see a lot of the pricing and reimbursement pressure that we face fragmented across 27 member states. But I think what we also see, and I think the intention is very good, to simplify legislation, but Omnibus brought also a lot of uncertainty. So we have start and stop actions in compliance preparedness for our industry. But I take it always as a positive challenge that we face change and we have to adapt to it. When I came here yesterday, I have seen an advertisement of European Union saying the world is changing, we have to adjust. And I think that's valid for our industry as well. But we are living and operating in a framework that is 3 decades old. And I discussed before this event, there is a delicate balance between environmental, for example, and health. Environmental is not even reflected in our framework. So I think we need to take the courage also to look at old frameworks, renew it, adjust it, simplify it, and also harmonize it. Because the patient doesn't care in which country he or she is traveling or living. I think European Union has a very nice vision, leaving no one behind. And that's what we try to do with ensuring the supply of medicines.
Thank you. Andy, Ines mentioned competitiveness there. We know that's the buzzword in Brussels. But we're also living in a moment of a little bit of geopolitical tension, particularly between the EU and the US. What's your assessment of how that affects the pharmaceutical sector?
Yes, I mean, everyone in the pharmaceutical industry, let's not forget the pharmaceutical industry is our biggest export in Europe and our biggest export to the US, over 100 billion annually of euros. So it was vital during the trade deal negotiations with the US to try and get a tariff-free access. There was, a good deal struck on that for most branded medicines and unbranded, but there's now this question of pricing where Donald Trump is talking about, you're not paying enough for our drugs, the system's not paying enough domestically. So he wants to cut drug prices at home while increasing them to compensate, basically, in other countries. And that's very hard for the EU, which, as Alessandra says, has 27 different paying authorities. It's almost impossible to coordinate a general price cut. The UK did it and is going to have to find the budget from the taxpayer to actually pay this money. And I think, just more broadly, the geopolitical challenges are the same as they are for the other industries and the competitiveness challenges. It's costs, it's China. China is becoming a global superpower in medicines as well, which is relatively new. The US has always been one, but is much, its system is much better at getting things to market and rewarding, innovative drugs. So these kind of twin challenges, which is facing the industry, like they are facing so many other European industries at the moment.
Well, we're not going to try and decipher what's going on in Donald Trump's brain today. We don't have enough time. But let's turn instead to the Critical Medicines Act. And the Parliament has recently adopted its position. So, Andy, explain to us a little bit about that legislation, why the EU felt the need to act. I'm assuming, of course, there was a lot of fallout after COVID that drove this. But tell us specifically where we're at this point.
Yes, as you say, it really is a result of COVID, where drugs started to become short, and particularly these ingredients that go into drugs. We discovered, as in so many other fields, that we're very reliant on in Asia for these inputs. So China and India particularly make these precursors that you need to make the drug. So even if you have the factories here and the scientists, if you can't get the ingredients, you can't make the drug. So the wise decision, I suppose, was made that we need to do something about this. A lot of member states actually pushed for this, 20-something, I recall, to say we need more stockpiling, we need more, incentives for domestic production, and this has become the Critical Medicines Act. It's in, the negotiating process now between the Council and the Parliament, and I think the broad lines are a general agreement on the need for it, but the usual tensions between Parliament, which tends to be more interventionist, and the member states who want to make sure that investment decisions are not compromised, because companies think, if I don't want to invest in Europe because I will have to do X, Y, Z, buy certain things domestically, whatever else it is. So it'll be interesting to see how that fight plays out. And I'm sure the two people on the panel know much more about how that's going than I do.
I will ask Ines about that in just a moment. But Alessandra, from your perspective, how satisfied are you with the outcome of the Parliament's position?
I think that this could be a good opportunity to shape a better environment for pharma R&D in the EU. And I believe that the second round of negotiations will be held today. We have a clear position from the Parliament, and I don't see major issues that could pose a threat to the legislation. I'm convinced that some of the proposals in the EP report could be important. For example, the position on the union coordination mechanism for stockpiles, giving the Commission the authority to redistribute medicines during a crisis, in an opportunity to create a safer European space for all. I'm also a strong supporter of finding a good balance between incentives and obligations for companies. The trilogues will define the balance between these two different aspects. On one side, the incentives for industries and the obligations on the other. We should never forget that anything we do is directed to promote a better access to patients for treatment and care. So I believe that we will find a good balance and a good key between these two different but very important elements.
Well, I presume, Ines, that we all hope for a good balance in the end of the trialogues, but talk us through your priorities, your preferences.
I think, first of all, we see it as a good start that we have medicines-focused policy making and that we have been heard because we had structural problems and we still have. I think the CMA is a good thing as such. On the other side, it's only a start because we are talking here about, 290 molecules, but the rest of the portfolio is huge and we are facing their challenges as well. So especially introduction of new environmental policies are putting a lot of more administrative burden and costs. And we need to be careful that not all of the product portfolio ending up as critical. So while I think the discussions on the Critical Medicines Act are going in the right direction, especially also going beyond price with meet criteria, that's very welcomed. I think we need also to take care of the rest of the portfolio and making sure that we have a framework that will allow us to ensure the business for the next years to come, because there are so many of millions of people relying on these medicines. It's not only these 290, there are much more than that. And we have to secure this as well.
Well, let's turn now to the broader pharmaceutical package again. And Andy, talk us through again how that intersects with the Critical Medicines Act and why it has really caused such an intense debate between policymakers and industry and all the various stakeholders.
Yeah. I do remember it came in at several hundred pages, the pharmaceutical package. I mean, it was an enormous, ambitious challenge, and it was refreshing a regime which was 20 years old and trying to find a more streamlined way to get drugs, medicines to people. And again, there's these two tensions between how much you want to pay for those medicines, which dictates in a way how much companies are going to invest in new medicines because they want a return on their investment, and it's very expensive, and these companies have to make a profit. We don't have a sort of, a state-led development model of medicines, so we need companies to want to create them. And so there was a question about how long patents should exist, how long a drug should be exclusive. And in the end, I think the Commission's idea was to mainly try and get more countries to be able to afford the drugs. So there was an attempt to get all 27 to be able to access them. That kind of fell a bit short because the pharmaceutical industry said that's too difficult. You can't make our profits dependent on whether one country wants to buy the drug or not. So we kind of ended up with, again, a sort of classic European fudge, which is probably not as terrible as the pharmaceutical industry thought it would be, but probably not as wonderful for patients as the Commission would like. And I think Alessandra said at the beginning, times are changing so fast that it's very hard because nobody wants to go back through a process that's just taken 2-3 years to do a new package, a new legislative framework. I think this issue of, having a single regulator to approve, that one approval for one country should be 27 and, we should operate as a single market, as you said earlier, is probably essential in the end. But that was politically difficult. And I don't think we're going to revisit that anytime soon. I could be wrong. But my sense is that we have to, the industry and policymakers have to make the best with what they've got for the next few years at least. But it will have to be revised because things change so quickly in the world now.
I mean, there is always this inherent tension between society-critical products and the economic case, which is simply something the policymakers have presented in front of them as they try to come up with the legislative side. So, Alessandra, tell me, where are we from your perspective and how happy are you with the final shape of the legislation?
Overall, I think that we did the best we could with the tools and resources available. As S&D group would have more focus on transparency, availability, affordability of medicines. Others were pushing for more concessions to industry. I see some missed opportunities. Me and my group tried to push for a proposal that could have changed the panorama for pharmaceutical in Europe, but unfortunately EPP and other groups didn't support it. The money we put on the table through Horizon are often spent in not coherent ways, in my opinion. They go in direction that sometimes don't follow the main objectives. Many stakeholders, including industries, of course, tell us that Horizon channels money in many directions, but sometimes lack a strategic and comprehensive vision. We were proposing to launch a new body of the EU, the European Medicine Facility, a public not-profit entity aimed at addressing market failures in pharmaceutical R&D. This is something to be built on the basis of the National Health Institute, where both private and public stakeholders come together to address unmet medical needs. It has not been accepted and supported in this phase, but I believe there is a huge value for the future, and we should all reconsider this proposal when we have the chance.
Ines, it's sometimes said about EU policy that it's successful if it makes everyone equally unhappy. Tell us your perspective and how satisfied you are.
So we are representing, or the company I'm working for, representing the off-patent medicine. So for us, it was important that the patients and the people who are relying on medicines have access, early access, that the prices are going down, medicines becoming affordable, and we can also help broadening up the access, making therapies available. Still in Europe, there is a lot of gap we need to close. And I think this has been achieved, and we know how complicated and how many pages people work through and try to find a balance. So actually, I think overall we have a good compromise. We see, of course, good positive and negative things, right? So on the negative side, I think there is still potential to simplify, less bureaucratic, less administrative burden on our side, so that we can really focus on production and delivering. But a lot of positive things happening as well, just mentioning the digital leaflet, which could open so much for people. Like we have migration happening in Europe, people not speaking the same language. Imagine you have one pack, you can share across Europe, people have access to the information and can also search, right? So the digital leaflet will bring a lot of new opportunities, and I think we should take it as soon as possible. This is about accessibility, and we can also help really taking the medicines in the right way, understanding the principles. So we are very happy about this piece.
Well, simplification is obviously always a big topic. Another is, of course, finance and the future financial budget, multi-annual financial framework, as it's called. What sort of financial support does the pharmaceutical industry need from the EU, and are you optimistic about getting it?
So I think you said it, Andy. So competitiveness and bringing manufacturing back to Europe is something we really need help. And also, like, the access to the funding is something we don't have. So sometimes the incentives are connected with very difficult criteria to meet, and we don't have easy access to that. So I think we should be very strict and say this is the rule. This is maybe even harmonized across 27 member states, but it's also easy accessible, simplified administration behind, so that it's realistic to also get the funding and also implement new things in Europe. So for me, it's just everything about accessibility and simple bureaucratic way behind that.
Alessandra, I know the MFF is a thorny topic and it's very difficult because there are so many competing and equally valuable needs. But should the pharmaceutical sector be getting a bigger slice of the cake, and what are the possibilities and where does it sit?
We need an ambitious budget for the EU. We appreciate the proposal of the Commission to increase Horizon, but we regret the decision of placing much of the health-related resources into the Competitiveness Fund. Health is not just a matter of competitiveness. although it's a very important, but it's also a social issue. This is why we, S&D Group, would like to have a dedicated budget program for health related issues, much as it was for the EU for Health, for example, in terms of what is needed for the industry. I think that the first and foremost, we need to have a clear set of rules, simplification, of course, and objectives. The Pharma Reform, the Critical Medicine Act are there to create, certainly in the regulation. We will be discussing soon the medical device and biotech regulations that will complete the framework. In terms of resources, it's not yet clear what will come out from the negotiations. My main concern will be that every euro spent in this field will be dedicated to promote and to support the interests of patients, with clear objectives and conditionalities associated to the use of public money.
Yeah. Well, when it's public money, of course, there has
Yes.
to be checks and balances and accountability. Andy, to wrap up, I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball and maybe give us your predictions for whether health will get a bigger share of that budget and what you expect.
I think that's difficult to see. When we look at the priorities of the EU at the moment, defence is going to get a big slice of money. Horizon will get an increase, some of which may come into health, but you don't hear really Commission, top people at the Commission talking about health, unfortunately, as one of the priorities of the budget. Agriculture will still be taking a big chunk. Cohesion policy will still be taking a big chunk. So this whole sort of modernised budget may look quite like the old budget. And I do think that there's an interesting case of prevention as well. I mean, some of the stockpiling and so on is about prevention, and I think public health is often very neglected. I mean, in the UK, where I was from before, where I lived before, after when they started cutting budgets, they cut the public health budget. And what happened was people got more and more sick, and therefore the hospital budget went up. So I think, there should be maybe some cold analysis of where is the best place to spend health money, and maybe some prevention as well as cure.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. Nothing is set in stone as yet. Of course, you'll be writing about it for the Financial Times. We'll be writing about it at EU Perspective. So I think that's a great place to leave our conversation today. Thank you very much to all three of our speakers. This has been the EU Perspectives podcast. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you can join us again next time.